You're watching World News Tonight on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Donald Trump is claiming tonight that Russia has the upper hand in peace talks over Ukraine as he again calls for a presidential election in the war-torn country. This as lawmakers in the US Congress attempt to stifle the president's plans to pull forces out of Europe. More in just a moment. But first, the latest headlines. A state of emergency in Lithuania over Belarusian smuggler balloons. Billionaire Andrej Babiš is formally appointed as the Czech Republic's new Prime Minister. And full steam ahead for Poland's first nuclear power plant. As we go to air, Volodymyr Zelenskyy says Ukraine is ready to send a revamped peace plan to Washington that rules out any ceding of land to Moscow. At the same time, the US Congress in Washington has unveiled a mega bill that pledges support to the war-torn country, even as Donald Trump says the European continent is decaying. Kazimierz Wysiek reports.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy met with Pope Leo in the Vatican on Tuesday, but he will need more than prayer to solve his problems. The main one being the US peace plan, which includes points on ceding territory to Russia.
Things which we can't manage without Americans, things which we can't manage without Europe, and that's why we need to make some important decisions.
Ceding land to Russia is a major red line for Ukraine, enshrined in the country's constitution. That's why Kyiv will soon be presenting another revised peace plan to the Donald Trump administration.
Now we need to agree it with the American side. I don't want there to be any contradictory points.
But there are contradictions, especially when it comes to communication from Washington. In the latest interview for Politico, the US president said that Russia has the stronger negotiating position and accused President Zelenskyy of standing in the way of a peace agreement.
Well, he's got to read the proposal. He hasn't read it yet.
Even though Russia hasn't made any significant progress on the front lines in the past 3 years and hasn't agreed to any peace proposal either, while Ukraine said yes to an immediate ceasefire already in March. The US president also believes Ukraine should hold an election.
I think it's an important time to hold an election. They're using war not to hold an election, but I would think the Ukrainian people should have that choice.
But Ukraine can't legally hold an election in wartime, and that's not the end of the inconsistencies. While President Trump is firmly against sending any aid to Ukraine for free, the US Congress, including Trump's Republican colleagues, doesn't follow that line. In the latest National Defense Authorization Act, a document outlining the US's defense policies and financing, the congressmen have agreed to extend aid for Ukraine to the amount of $800 million spread over the next 2 years.
It's extraordinary. Congress is defying the president here, and it's the both sides of the Congress. It's not just the Democrats, because Congress, let's remind our viewers, is controlled by the Republicans. So it's the conservative Republicans who are not in agreement with the president on the issue as fundamental as support for Ukraine.
It also includes provisions aimed at preventing the US from decreasing the number of its troops in Europe below 76,000 and relinquishing the NATO Supreme Allied Command. Trump previously hinted at doing both in the near future.
Congress would need to be notified. The number of troops in Europe should not go below a certain level, which is not that different from current level. The money towards the Baltic Defense Initiative to contribute to the military aid in the Baltic states is ramped up.
Even though Congress may be more supportive of Kyiv and Europe than Trump,
most European nations, they're decaying.
It is still the US president who'll likely make the final call on the shape of the peace plan for Ukraine, whether Europe likes it or not. For TVP World, Kazimierz Wysiek.
Staying with the fallout now of President Trump's verbal assault on Europe, let's go straight to Kyiv, where our correspondent Oz Chatterjee is standing by. Good evening, Oz. So Donald Trump again calling for wartime elections in Ukraine. Is that even possible?
Good evening, Aaron. Well, President Zelenskyy responded to this. He's currently in Italy visiting the Pope, and Giorgia Meloni, speaking to Italy's La Repubblica, said he was always ready for elections. However, as Kazimierz pointed out, the difficulties with that are extensive. Ukraine cannot constitutionally hold an election while it's under martial law. Martial law is a rolling measure that keeps getting voted up by Ukraine's parliament, the democratically elected representatives of Ukraine's people. So that would require a suspension of martial law. And for that, it would require some sort of pause, at least, in hostilities, so that Ukraine no longer needs to be operating a system of martial law. That's one question. The other question, probably a bigger question than the constitutional element, is the fact that parts of Ukraine are under Russian occupation. And to hold an election, there needs to be safety for the electorate. And that currently is something the Ukrainian authorities cannot offer to Ukrainians who are under Russian occupation or close to frontline positions where holding ballots would be very, very difficult. So these are major issues for Ukraine. Now, it must be said that Zelenskyy is under some domestic pressure, particularly given this anti-graft probe into Ukraine's state-owned nuclear energy provider, Energoatom. That has significantly ramped up pressure against Zelenskyy domestically. However, it must be said, Ukrainian opposition parties, by and large, have not been calling for elections, have not been calling for the ending of martial law to allow those elections to happen. Yulia Serko, Ukrainian MP, speaking to TVP World's World Talks, had this to say.
In general, we are happy to conduct elections as soon as security guarantees will arrive or security situation will allow us to do. Because actually we can do it tomorrow, but I mean we don't know how many people will come to the polling stations under the missiles and drone attacks, as well as foreign observers will come, for example, to eastern or southern part of Ukraine, and also to be observers on elections under the missiles and drones. So we're able to conduct it, but you know that we have at least 7 million people abroad of Ukraine who must vote, and as well as we have over 6 million internally displaced people. So they have to be somehow registered, and also we need to provide them with a polling station. So it's a big and long process, but the biggest issue is about the security and safety of the election.
So that was Yulia Serko from the opposition Holos party. It's very clear that the opposition and Zelenskyy are speaking as one when it comes to the issue of elections. It's not that Kyiv doesn't want to hold elections, it's that its hands are tied and it can't currently hold elections under the current circumstances. This is something that is widely understood here in Ukraine. There aren't significant calls from the population for elections either. So it must be said that while Donald Trump keeps raising this issue, this is not a significant issue currently for Ukrainians as they see it. Certainly not as significant as trying to bring the war to some sort of resolution. Back to you, Aaron.
Oz Chatterjee, our correspondent in Kyiv, thank you. And we'll break down this developing story with Daniel Hamilton, president of the Transatlantic Leadership Network, later on World News Tonight. Moving to Lithuania now, where a state of emergency has been declared over smuggling balloons carrying cigarettes across the border of pro-Russia Belarus. Vilnius Airport and the surrounding airspace has repeatedly been brought to a standstill in recent months, with officials calling the incursions part of Moscow's hybrid war. So what does the state of emergency mean on the ground? John Todd explains.
Soldiers on the streets of Vilnius. It's a sight set to become more likely after Lithuania's government on Tuesday declared an emergency over balloons from Belarus that have caused chaos in the country.
The emergency situation gives the army the opportunity to participate jointly in patrols and vehicle controls, as well as to intervene in areas close to the border.
The troops here are training to enforce a mock wartime curfew. If Parliament agrees, the army will be given permission to stop and search vehicles, limit access to territory, check people and their documents, and detain those resisting or suspected of crimes.
This situation is expanded all over the Lithuanian territory, so that's why it concerns each and every part of the country.
So far this year, the country has suffered 600 airspace violations by balloons used to smuggle cigarettes from Belarus and 197 drone incursions. It's caused chaos at Vilnius airport, where 350 flights have been disrupted, affecting more than 51,000 passengers. The Lithuanian government says these incidents are hybrid attacks and blame Belarusian authorities for failing to stop the balloon and drone flights.
The military police is involved. Also, there are also some tests going on how to neutralize these balloons. The military is also involved in tracking them using military radars as well.
Vilnius lies just 35 kilometers from the border with Belarus. Experts say Moscow and Minsk are testing NATO with balloon and drone incursions at one of the alliance's most vulnerable points.
They intentionally targeting that area which is adjacent to the Vilnius International Airport. It's nothing about smuggling anymore. It's a very well prepared special operation just to target our national security.
The former Deputy Foreign Minister said the incursions are a test of NATO and should be tackled jointly by NATO countries. John Todd for TVP World.
Billionaire businessman Andrej Babiš is officially the next Prime Minister of the Czech Republic. Babiš, whose ANO party won October's parliamentary election, is returning for his second stint in the top job and will govern alongside the far-right SPD and the Eurosceptic Motorists Party. And as Andrew Sweeney reports from Prague, there are some fears that the three-pronged coalition could slash support for Ukraine.
Now that Andrej Babiš has officially been confirmed as the Czech Republic's new Prime Minister, the formation of the Czech government can move into the final stages. During his meeting with President Petr Pavel today, Babiš said that he would govern in the interest of all and that he'd make the Czech Republic the best country in the world.
I have been appointed Prime Minister. I value this greatly, as well as the trust of the citizens which they gave us in the elections. I promise to do everything to ensure we do not betray that trust and fulfill the programmatic declaration of our government. I promise to be a Prime Minister who defends the interests of all our citizens at home and in the world, and a Prime Minister who will work to make the Czech Republic the best place to live on the entire planet.
The new government, made up of Babiš's ANO party, the far-right SPD and the anti-environmentalists for motorists, will officially be confirmed on December the 15th. The government is widely expected to drastically cut support for Ukraine, allowing private sector initiatives while ending state-organised support like the Czech Ammunition Initiative. Despite this, Ukraine's Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko congratulated Babiš today and invited him to visit Ukraine in the near future.
I congratulate Andrej Babiš on his appointment as Prime Minister of the Czech Republic. Ukraine is grateful to Czechia for its support in the face of Russian aggression, as well as for its significant assistance and solidarity with our people. I sincerely invite you, Prime Minister, to visit Ukraine as one of your first international trips.
The new government is reportedly planning to reject the EU's Migration and Asylum Pact, as well as the emissions trading scheme known as ETS2. It's also planning to bring in a stringent new anti-asylum law. Students across the Czech Republic walked out of their classrooms today, protesting against the incoming government's anti-environment and anti-migrant policies. With these measures and a renewed focus on the Visegrad 4, Babiš's government is expected to be closely aligned with Robert Fico of Slovakia and Hungary's Viktor Orban. However, according to Wojciech Przybylski, chief editor of Visegrad Insight, Babiš is likely to prove more pragmatic than Fico and Orban.
Mr. Babiš is not expected to be very ideological. Well, Mr. Babiš is going to probably go for whatever pays back from engagement with any of the Central European formats that he can get. He's not going to be Orban too.
Babiš is due to travel to Brussels on December 18th to attend his first European Council meeting of his new term. For TVP World in Prague, Andrew Sweeney.
Poland could kick off construction of the country's first nuclear plant as early as this month, after Brussels signed off on public funding for the project. That's according to Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who says the €45 billion project on the Baltic coast will now move at full speed. Our business editor Jakub Kabiszewski has more.
This patch of cleared forest in Poland's north holds the key to the country's energy future. This is where Poland will build its first nuclear power plant. And on Wednesday, another hurdle in the project has been cleared. The European Commission approved Polish state aid for the station.
This may sound technical, but the bottom line is that Poland can move forward with the construction process starting this year in December.
Even if the construction efforts are to speed up in December, the site itself is far from silent.
We're standing where the third reactor will be located, so we need very precise information as to how deep its foundation needs to go.
The station itself isn't the only thing that needs to be built. The construction site needs a new road link, a new rail line and a purpose-built pier, as explained by an engineer who worked on the Finnish nuclear station in Olkiluoto.
This blue strip right here is for heavy shipments, enormous components not allowed to float anywhere else.
The mammoth €45 billion project envisions 3 nuclear reactors made by American company Westinghouse, with a total power output of 3.7 gigawatts, covering 10% of the country's future power needs. The government wants the first concrete for the reactors to be poured in 2028. The station could start commercial operations in 2036.
Winter evenings in Poland's capital are often cold, dark and grey, though in the Warsaw suburb of Wilanów, a little light goes a long way. Natalia Komarov joins the almost 3 million people who have already visited the Royal Garden of Light's 14th edition.
Long winter evenings can be beautiful. Let us take you on a walk. The palace in Wilanów was built in the late 17th century as the summer residence of King Jan III and his beloved wife, Maria. It is surrounded by a magnificent garden, which every winter turns into a beautiful spectacle of lights and music.
This is our 14th winter. The Garden of Lights in Wilanów was the first one in Europe and I think the third in the world. Here on the upper terrace, we have illuminations connected to King Jan's interest in astronomy and his friendship with astronomer Jan Hevelius. Astrolabes, telescopes, globes.
Even the most skilled royal gardeners couldn't grow roses this big.
The roses are located where the rose garden had been for at least 200 years.
The Royal Garden of Lights in Wilanów has been visited by nearly 3 million people so far. It will remain open until the end of February. For TVP World, Natalia Komarov.
And joining me now is Daniel Hamilton, President of the Transatlantic Leadership Network. Good evening to you, sir.
Good evening.
So President Trump says European leaders are, quote, weak and decaying. He says Russia has the upper hand. He says there should be a presidential election in Ukraine. He says Volodymyr Zelenskyy is the one standing in the way of peace. I mean, are we seeing in real time Donald J. Trump buckle to Vladimir Putin?
Well, the president said many things like this in the past, so I don't think these things are very surprising. I don't think that the peace plan that he had advanced is moving forward very well, mainly because Russia has rejected it. not Ukraine. And the Europeans now, with President Zelenskyy, are coming up with an alternative formulation. I doubt that the Russians will accept that. So unfortunately, I think it's actually just more of the same rather than any major shift. The document you mentioned and the interview that the president gave are, again, these should be no surprises. This is the way the president speaks about Europe. And the policies behind it, though, are somewhat different than what you hear just listening to him.
In this interview out today, President Trump also says, and I quote, "I think they don't know what to do. Europe doesn't know what to do." I'm interested in your view on that. I mean, does he have some kind of a point that Europe, and particularly the European Union, talks a big game, but ultimately is struggling for unity, struggling to make decisions? And I'm thinking here particularly of the Russian frozen asset standoff.
Well, that's one example. I mean, I think I would agree with the president. The Europeans don't seem to know what to do. The model that had been built during the 30 years after the Cold War was based on the assumption that there would be peace in Europe. And Putin has shown that to be false. They built a reliance on Russian energy, on Chinese markets, and U.S. security. Each of those things are in question, and there seems to be little movement in Europe to sort of reestablish its own economic vitality and to do more for its own defense. So I think there is a point here that the Europeans seem to be still slumbering along while the world is moving ahead.
I guess the question is too, we've got the Trump White House laying into Europe. We have no commitment to Article 5 in that revised US posture, this clause that says an attack on one is an attack on all. And at the same time, we've got President Macron this week insisting Europe still holds, quote, a lot of cards. Do leaders here in Europe need to get with the program to accept that America, when it comes to supporting Europe, is kind of out of the picture?
I mean, one has to, if you take a U.S. point of view, we have obligations in the Pacific and the Atlantic, and now the Western Hemisphere. And the Pentagon is very stretched. It can't do all of that all the same without some help. If there's a crisis in Taiwan and also Ukraine, U.S. forces might not be there in the way the Europeans expect that. So Americans, I think, across the board are expecting Europe to do more for its own security. And despite pledges of more money, that has to translate into real action. That'll take years to come. Hopefully the U.S. will stand by Europe while that process is underway.
Now, something appears to be brewing in the US Congress, this bipartisan bill that would still allow cash to flow to Ukraine and could even limit the ability of President Trump to withdraw troops from across the Atlantic. Is that a potential saving grace for Europe, despite Donald Trump's rhetoric, or is it a useless piece of paper?
No, this is the bill that authorizes the entire funding of the Pentagon for the whole next year. It's a $900 billion bill. It's a must-pass bill, 3,000 pages. And just as in the first Trump term, in the second Trump term, you're seeing Republicans in the U.S. Senate in particular bucking the president when he comes to criticizing NATO or threatening to withdraw. It's a bipartisan bill now, mainly led by Republicans, that blocks the Pentagon from deploying below a threshold of forces that are about close to what we have right now, without all sorts of provisions. It blocks the Pentagon from replacing the Supreme Allied Commander, with a European. It's an American right now. It blocks them from divesting of any real estate. It stops them from removing any equipment from Europe. This is a, frontal assault on the president's rhetoric about leaving Europe. It also restores funding to the Baltic states for the Baltic Security Initiative, $176 million. So the Congress, is very supportive of NATO and is doing what it can, and it is blocking the president now on the rhetorical flourishes you might see coming from the White House.
You mentioned that it's a frontal assault on President Trump. I mean, how divided is America and Washington right now between the MAGA crowd in power and, I guess, the Democrats, and you mentioned the Republicans there too in Congress, who seem adamant on backing Europe and Kyiv?
One has to always keep in mind, every poll would show that the vast majority, probably 80% of Americans, support NATO and say Europe is our major, closest ally. There's been no change in that over time. you have a particular administration now that has a sort of ideological beef against the Europeans, instinctively anti-European in some ways, a civilizational approach to this. And they happen to be in the executive branch, but the Republicans in Congress, many very conservative people, simply aren't going along with it, and the Democrats aren't either. So, this is a fight. We have a normal fight in the United States on our priorities, but I think this one will still carry the day, and that the U.S. will remain engaged in NATO and committed to European defense.
You mentioned those polls, and you beat me to the punch, because I've got some of those numbers here. A survey out from the Reagan Institute which shows 62% of respondents wanting Ukraine to prevail over Russia, 64% wanting the US to send weapons, and that record 68% favourability rating towards NATO. Is Donald Trump acting against the mood of his own country?
Yes. But he, when people vote, they're not voting for these types of issues. They're voting for their pocketbook issues. They voted last year for primarily domestic reasons. And here, too, the president's in some trouble because inflation, the decline in that is stopped. There's a lot of concern about what people are calling affordability, just, how expensive is your daily life? Can you meet your costs? And the president's having some trouble, addressing those issues. And the Democrats are looking good in the run-up to the midterm elections next November for the House of Representatives. So we're having our normal political debates. Europe is part of that, but it's not the lead issue. As usual, in most countries, domestic issues take priority.
So given that, do you think Donald Trump cares at all that he's working in a way against the tide domestically? Does he really take notice of that?
I think he thrives on his own, worldview. He is a person who I think is still in the 1980s in a way, and thinks he's a real estate dealer. So he thinks about these types of things, about transactional deals. He thinks Ukraine is sort of an irritant. It gets in the way of the things he'd like to do, strike deals with other big countries, and not have to deal with this type of pesky real military stuff. And unfortunately, aggression in Ukraine doesn't conform to that. And we're all dealing with the consequences of him getting his mind around that fact.
Well, let's talk about Ukraine and Donald Trump's attempt, in a way, to strike his art of the deal approach when it comes to Ukraine and Russia. He's again saying that President Zelenskyy is standing in the way of peace, even as Ukraine prepares to send a revised proposal, of course, ruling out any concession of land. But do you see a world where Kyiv will need to give up land to stand any hope for a ceasefire brokered by America?
I think a ceasefire, the only one that seems possible, would be around the line of control where the opposing forces now control the territory. That would be very tenuous. I don't think it would last very well. Both sides would try to seek marginal advantage. It will remain a contested area for a long time to come, regardless of a so-called ceasefire. So I don't think we should think about a ceasefire as ending the hostility between Russia and Ukraine. This conflict will go on in whatever form for years and years, because Russia is not reconciled to the post-war settlement. And as your recent episode you just noticed in the last newsreel I just saw, Russia is conducting all sorts of other attacks on European territory. So it's not just limited to Ukraine. Russia is not reconciled to the European security order as it exists, and we're going to have to deal with that and position ourselves to confront that and deter it for another generation. This is the stakes involved here. And Ukraine, is fielding the largest army in Europe right now. It is defending Europe from Russian aggression. So we should all be behind it.
Mr. Hamilton, I want to end with one word: flattery. Because since Donald Trump returned as president, we've seen leaders of all stripes attempt to woo the president, to swing him onto Ukraine's side, towards the European project. We've even seen, as you will know, the likes of Mark Rutte, NATO's boss, calling him daddy. Have these leaders ultimately failed to convince Washington of Europe and of Ukraine's merits? And are they now fighting a losing battle?
Well, I think it really depends on whoever's in the room with the president last, because you notice a pattern. As soon as he, say, meets with European leaders, then he's all very positive again. He hasn't seen them for a while. So some of them should be making a trip here, probably. But in terms of flattery, Vladimir Putin has the same tactic. He flattered the president constantly when they met in Alaska. Everyone is doing this around the world. The only leader in the world that's not doing it is Xi Jinping of China. When they met, he hardly gave the president a glance. And he has had a much more successful approach to Trump, frankly, it seems, than to advance his own interests than almost any other country. So, tactics are something the president loves to be flattered, but I'm not sure that in the end that's really determinative.
Daniel Hamilton, President of the Transatlantic Leadership Network, thank you as always for your time.
Thank you so much.
And that's all for World News tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World for more. I'm Aaron Darman. Good night.